Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Poetry Festival Singapore, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you all, the audience who are joining us, and our esteemed panelists who are joining us across 3 continents from America, Africa, and Asia. My name is Shilpa, and I'm the host for the panel today, which is Building Bridges with Poetry. And when I was putting this panel together, I came across this interesting quote by the Greek philosopher Plato, who says, "Poetry is nearer to vital truth than history." Poetry is nearer to vital truth than history. And I couldn't agree more. And so today, here with me, we have such lovely guests. And we are going to be discussing a lot about poetry and its relevance in, tapping and building bridges within communities and across communities, especially given the pandemic. So without much ado, I would like to welcome our panelist. Our first panelist we have is Suzanne Lewis. Suzanne M. Lewis is founder and coordinator of Revolution of Tenderness, a non-profit company dedicated to educational programs and free cultural events. Suzanne also founded and publishes Convivium, a journal of arts, culture, and testimony. Suzanne earned both a Master of Social Services from the Brian Mauer School of Social Services and a Master of Fine Arts from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She has 4 grown daughters and has published several books. Warm welcome, Suzanne. Our next panelist, we have Shinie Antony. Warm welcome, Shinie. Shinie Antony has written short story books, Barefoot and Pregnant, The Orphanage for Words, and novels, The Girl Who Couldn't Love, and When Mira Went Forth and Multiplied. She has compiled the anthologies Why We Don't Talk, An Unsuitable Woman, and Boo. Co-founder of the Bangalore Literature Festival and director of the Bengaluru Poetry Festival. Her story, A Dog's Death, won the Commonwealth Short Story Asia Prize in 2002. Her novel, Can't, will be out next year. Warm welcome, Shinie. Our next panelist is Dr. Christopher Okemwa. He is from Kistrech Poetry Festival. Christopher Okemwa is a literature lecturer at Kisii University, Kenya. He has a PhD in performance poetry from Moi University, Kenya. He is the founder and current director of Kistrech International Poetry Festival in Kenya. His novella, Sabina and the Mystery of the Ogre, won the Canadian Burt Award for African Literature in 2015. Its sequel, Sabina the Rain Girl, was selected for the UN 2.0 Hunger Reading List. Okimba is the editor of Musings During a Time of Pandemic, a world anthology of poems on COVID-19, and I Can't Breathe, a poetic anthology of social justice. He's the author of 10 folktales of Abagosi people, 3 children's storybooks, 1 play, 2 novels, and 4 oral literature textbooks. Warm welcome, Dr. Christopher Okemwa.
Thank you.
And then last but not the least at all, we have our very own director from Poetry Festival Singapore, Dr. Eric Valles. Eric Tinsay Valles has published the poetry collections, A World in Transit, and After the Fall, Dirges Among Ruins, as well as co-edited Get Lucky, an anthology of Singapore and Philippine writings. SG Poems 2015-2016, Anima Mathodi, The Nature of Poetry, The Atelier of Healing, A Given Grace, and Finding God in All Things. He has won a Go Sin Tab Creative Writing Prize as well as the Illumination and the E-Lit Book Awards. He has been invited to read poetry or commentaries at Baylor, Melbourne, and Oxford universities. He is the director of Poetry Festival Singapore. Warm welcome to each of you. My name is Shilpa, and I'm the host of this evening. So it's entirely my pleasure to have you all here. So good to see you all here, everyone. Before when we start with poetry, when you all started out, how did you all start with, founding your poetry festival? Like, did you all join it first, or how did you all establish it? Like, I would just want to know, your fascinating journey as a director of the poetry festival. So we can start with, Suzanne, and take it from there. When was it established, and like, how did you all start it? We can have Suzanne there. Hi, Suzanne.
The festival that I began, the Festival of Friendship, is a general arts and culture festival that always includes poetry. And the reason why we began was because we wanted a place where poetry could be experienced for free. We don't charge any money for this event. And we invite a great diversity of poets. And our hope is that poetry can become less frightening to people. And that's why it's a general cultural event. We have events on politics or medicine or history. And so we're hoping for cross-pollination. Our poetry events then become a moment for some people who never read poetry to recognize, oh, this is a way of communicating a reality about being human that can't be done any other way. It's an art form, but it's more than that. It's really an expression of the human heart that has a value that we've lost in some sense in American culture. I can't speak for your cultures, but in America, it seems like poetry has been placed in this rarefied position in the academy, and only when you've had certain kind of training can you have access to it. And so part of our mission is to bring poetry back into a public arena where people from many different backgrounds and ages can enjoy it. So it began in 2004, but each year it's grown, and I can answer more specific questions as we go. I want to hear from the other panelists.
Yeah, sure. Wow, 2004. Thank you so much, Suzanne. That's like amazing. And I really like the fact that you have put in, to bring poetry to the masses, to reach everyone, right? So that was the purpose. Yeah. Shinie?
Hi, Shilpa. It's so nice to be at a place where poetry is being honored. Bengaluru Poetry Festival was thought up by Subodh and Lakshmi Shankar, who own a bookstore called Atagalata in Bangalore that sells Indian books, actually. So we had our first edition in 2016, very apologetically, very apprehensively. We kept thinking, empty chairs, empty chairs. So imagine our shock when there was literally no place to stand. We had Piyush Mishra, when he went up on stage, I remember there was no breathing space in the hall. Somebody had to exhale if you needed to inhale. It was that, that crowded. But that was one myth exploded right there, that poetry doesn't sell, poetry is not read, poetry is too niche. Poetry is oxygen, it takes down walls, and everyone, including you guys here, I'm sure knew it for a long time. I learned it that day.
Thank you so much, Shinie. Yeah, so as you said, poetry you need to inhale. It's like oxygen, right? It's just there, and it's so vital. Very, very exactly what Plato said. So yeah, yes, Dr. Christopher Okemwa. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Christopher Okemwa, as you have heard. I teach at KISS University, but I also run the Kistrech International Poetry Festival. I started the Kistrech International Poetry Festival in 2013. That is after I went around the world attending various poetry festivals internationally, especially in Belgium, in London, and also in Northern Ireland. Coming back to Kenya, I thought, why don't I begin a platform on which international poets as well as local poets can come together and share ideas. And I realized that in Africa, we have that gap. We do have scarcity of such a festival, such a literary events where poets can really share their ideas and grow. So I thought I'm the right person and who should be able to initiate such a project like that one, whereby the poets, especially a local one, can benefit from the international poets, and the international poets can also benefit from the poetry in Africa, especially poetry in Africa, which is anchored on the African oral traditions and which is anchored on songs and chants, and be able to learn from what we do here in Africa. So in 2013, I started this festival, and I partially funded it. And it was very difficult to start it because we didn't have funds. Of course, even now we do not have funds. And it was really, really, really challenging and difficult to start such a poetry festival, such a big thing in Africa. And those poets who came mostly from India and Asia found it very difficult really to be able to attend the poetry festival, because most of the time we could be able to use our meager resources, and I was able to use my own resources, which was really challenging. So I contemplating on stopping that festival, but later on my wife told me, why don't you just continue a little bit for 1 or 2 years and see what happens? Maybe somebody will come around and be able to fund the festival. I went to 2014 and nothing much happened. And we were able to run the festival with the poets contributing to the festival and also paying their own costs. And the festival ran on well. 2015, KISS University came in to give us a buzz. In 2016, more and more poets came from international world and paying their own costs and even supporting some of the poetry activities that we were running. And the festival continued on and on up to now. Of course, even now we haven't got a funder or a donor or any support from anybody, but we feel we are doing well. And the poets from various countries are coming and are saying, no, we can just fund our own living there. There's no need. If there's no funds, we can just come to Kenya and pay for accommodation, food, and transport, and so on. And we have carried on. Of course, what I'm trying to do is I try to approach embassies in Kenya, foreign embassies in Kenya, and they are coming up and they are supporting their own poets. Like the Israeli embassy is supporting their poets. Norwegian Literature Abroad is supporting 3 poets every year. The Netherlands, I don't know, Dutch Literature Foundation is supporting their own poets. They are supporting 1 poet coming this year. Greece Embassy supported somebody in 2019. Spanish Embassy is going to start funding 1 person this year.
Wow. And
so on and so forth. So the festival is standing on its own without funds, but we are able to carry on with the activity and
that's so
and enjoying ourselves. Yes.
Yeah, that's so heartening. I mean, to listen to that story of like how you almost thought that you should give it up, and then you listen to your wife, right? The wife is always right. Okay, that's a good. Okay, so we'll come back to you again. I'm just so excited to have all of you all on the panel. And Eric, yes, please tell us about Poetry Festival Singapore.
Yeah, before I do that, I had a wonderful time at Kistrech. I can't remember how. Maybe was that 5 years ago? And
2016.
2016, right? the people are very warm and friendly, and they really pay attention to the poets when we recited our works. And I remember one incident in which, because we were in an immersion in a Kisi village, and so we were with this family, and then as a welcome gift, they uprooted a sugarcane plant and gave it to me, an entire plant. And I was wondering just how I would bring back that I would bring that back home to Singapore. But I had a great time, Christopher. Now, Poetry Festival Singapore started out as a revival of an idea that the father of Singapore literature, Edwin Thumboo, had in the 1960s. So he started out something like Poetry Festival Singapore with his friends, Wong Meng Voon, Masuri SN, and VT Arasu. And the idea was to have a festival that featured poetry in the official languages of Singapore, namely English, Chinese, Tamil, and Malay, and to showcase that. And then it took fairly a long time for him to. So we were put together like a boy band, like BTS. So we had Tanchile, who is like the authority in Chinese language literature here. He's won many awards. And then Azhar Ibrahim of NUS, who has written countless articles and has conducted research on Malay language lit and poetry especially. And Lata K. Kanangalata, who is an editor of the Tamil newspaper here. She's multi-awarded, not just in poetry, but also in fiction. And then I've been acquainted with Prof. Thumboo since my my research days in NUS. So we worked together before, and then he thought that I would be able to work with those people, and so we were put together. In terms of funding, it isn't really very difficult. Well, it is in a way, but there is plenty of state support for poetry and the arts here. And before COVID, we were having a book launch almost every other week, like a poetry book launch. And the National Arts Council here, I suppose, single-handedly has revived publishing of poetry. Yeah, because most of the poetry books here get some sort of grants, has grants, and they have grants and state support from the National Arts Council. I don't know if Shilpa approached the National Arts Council before for your books.
No, I didn't know about that, so I did not approach. I was
plenty
very
of,
apprehensive of that. But
All right.
next time, sure. Yeah.
And so it just so happened that among the literary genres here, poetry is one in which Singaporeans tend to be very prolific at. And it just was natural that there should be a literary festival that's devoted to this this literary form. And we could create new work. We have this national poetry competition that's based here. And we are also promoting the Singapore Poetry Scene. So there's a whole ecosystem that we would like to support with our events all throughout the year.
Thank you so much, Eric. That was very informative. And yes, poetry scene in Singapore is thriving. And we have a plethora of poets, very good poets, very accomplished. And that really, enriches us because there's so much to read and there's so much to learn and there's always so much to read again. So that's one thing which is really nice. So, we were talking about how most of y'all established it around, except I think Suzanne established it very early on, but like everyone started around 2014, 2016, around that time. And so by the time I think you all kind of like got a footing, we had the pandemic, right? So what do you feel like? How did the pandemic actually impact this whole, because you probably got a footing, you probably started like, getting an idea of how what reaction you're getting, what is the response from the audience. And before you know it, you have this 3-year pandemic thrown at all of us, right? So how did you all navigate your way through the pandemic as festival directors? Yeah, Suzanne?
It's very interesting because in 2020, my personal feeling was we just have to put in a big effort and we'll get through this. And so we mounted a very, really a larger festival online, because our festivals in the past had only been over a 3-day weekend. But we thought, first of all, it would be exhausting for participants to sit 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day in front of their screens. And second of all, we thought we would have the opportunity to spread it out over the course of a month and do events every night, weeknights, weekends, and also begin to involve international speakers who we didn't have the funds to fly them from overseas. We could suddenly have them as speakers and readers at the festival. So first of all, we were ambitious, and second of all, we had all this hope. But we got tired. In 2021, we did a series of online events featuring poetry and this piece of music that Shilpa knows about, that we had commissioned, that I can talk more about. And it was very well received, but it was a much more modest experience, and partly because we got tired. So we didn't mount the really large, ambitious, full festival that we had done the year before. And this year, we again are doing a poetry event in early November, the weekend of November 4th and 5th, but it will be more modest again. And it will be in person again, though we'll have the online dimension, because now we don't want to lose it, since we do have this opportunity to have a larger audience, to involve a much more diverse group of people. But I would say that the challenges of the pandemic were maybe greater than I first imagined when it started. And maybe it was good that I couldn't imagine how difficult it would be. And so we did this crazy month-long event that we still have the recordings for. So I'm happy about that too. So it is very hard, though. There are certain advantages to being able to do things via Zoom. Like, for example, this meeting would be impossible, right? And the pandemic taught us that we could connect across continents. But it's also been very wearying for people's hearts, and the COVID rules that we have to follow when we gather in public, and the inability to be physically affectionate as we ordinarily would, with hugs or handshakes or just a pat on the back. Those sorts of things, I think, have really exhausted time. Yeah, so I will, when you ask me when it's appropriate, I will talk more about the special project that you were involved with, Shilpa, because I think it really highlights some of the advantages that we were able to tap into that the pandemic afforded us, and also the challenges.
Yeah, sure. Definitely. Thank you so much, Suzanne. That was really nice. Yes, I guess the pandemic has been very weary, and we all have kind of like been bogged down. Every time you think you're seeing the tail end of it, it raises its head again. So yeah, just fingers crossed. So hopefully we are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel now. Shinie, what do you have to say?
I think Suzanne has pretty much summed it up. That whole, day-to-day kind of hope and hopelessness that we went through. But, that was life and death. And the main thing about the pandemic, that was, it got rid of all the fluff. And that's when we realized that poetry is like a survival kit. It got us through on very intimate, personal, private, secret terrains. It got us through the toughest times in our life, I would say. So poetry is about survival. It is about existence. It is about us. And that's what I think the pandemic really taught us, bringing poetry closer to us. And we did have one online session in 2020. For a technophobe like me, it was very difficult to get my head around that same buzz and the same. But I have to admit that that's not true. The recorded versions, it's like having another kind of festival. But this year we are going live. I'm really looking forward to that. We are having it just like the way we used to have pre-pandemic. And like you said, Shilpa.
Yes, that's amazing news. That's really so heartening, right? To see that things are going back to normal. And I'm sure even the poets are so excited to be reading in person because it's different. It's different when you are looking at a screen, and it's different when you are actually looking at people's faces right there. And as you say, inhaling and exhaling the same oxygen, right? The poetry oxygen, which is there in a room of poets.
Shinie, will it all, pardon me, Shilpa, I'm sorry. Will it also be online? Could I possibly take part from a distance?
I think Poetry Festival, whether will have recorded sessions or not, we will be having. We've always had, when we've had live sessions, we go onto the YouTube later. I don't think it's a live thing. You will not be, Suzanne, able to watch it while it's going on here, but definitely maybe within a week or two, or maybe a month max, it's put out for the public.
I'm so excited. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shinie. Yeah. Yes, Dr. Christopher. How,
Yes.
with the pandemic and all the challenges, how have you managed to bring, and what were the fierce challenges which you faced during this time?
Yeah, sorry, my electricity is off, but no problem. Let me continue. The pandemic affected quite a lot in Africa, as you know. Socially, economically, things were not very good. So equally with art, it was also equally affected. We could not hold the Poetry Festival in 2020, 2021, and until this year in October, that's when we shall resume. But for those 2 years, we were in total darkness, and most of the poets who had acquired funds from European countries had to return the funds because they could not travel to Kenya. And it was so disappointing in 2020 that most poets who wanted to travel could not travel to Kenya. We thought things were going to be okay, but it went on and on with a lot of uncertainty, with a lot of not being sure what's going to happen next. And we kept on holding the festival until this year when we shall be holding it. And then secondly, as you know, we have meager resources in Africa. The electricity is a problem. Internet connectivity is a problem. So not many of us could participate in Zoom poetry readings. Not many of us could be connected with the international world in poetry, simply because of these challenges we do have in most countries in Africa, like internet connectivity and the poor internet and so on and so forth. So we could not be able to continue, and we could not be able to do things normally, especially in the poetry sector. So then, as you know, many people were dying around us, and there was a lot of fear. and meeting physically was difficult in 2020 and 2021. And as you know, African poetry is normally performative in nature, and you've got to meet physically and be able to enjoy the poetry. And most of our poetry, as Eric Valles can tell you,
I think you
So therefore, it could not work. 2020 and 2021 was difficult. We could not be able to read our poetry through Zoom because of the poor internet, and also we could not be able to meet physically because of the coronavirus and the fear that surrounded it. So it was a big challenge on and on. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And that's really sad actually, because, every part of the world we have battled in such various ways, right? Like the pandemic has kind of had its effect in various stratas and almost all stratas of society. I guess that's been hard, but I think, being the eternal optimist, we poets, we need to have heart and rally on and get the team together to produce more poetry and to perform and to, bring the community together again. So hopefully you will have another one very soon, right? Eric, yes.
Yeah, in October.
Yeah, for sure. So the pandemic has affected the performance of poetry as well as its reception, because you can't really have a first-hand experience of the enthusiasm of your audience. You wouldn't be able to have a live sugarcane plant given to you at the end of your poetry performance anymore. But in the case of Poetry Festival Singapore, at the start of the pandemic, we were planning to subcontract the recording of the festival to a group that was overseas. We had this bid for the contract, and we awarded it for at a lower cost to that foreign company, and then COVID struck, so they were grounded. And then that was very close to the start of the festival, because we have our festival at the end of July every year, and COVID was at the start. It was really bad here in Singapore about April. We went into a soft lockdown of sorts then. So we had to scramble for somebody who could do the video recording. And fortunately, one of the directors had a close family friend who could do it at a lower cost. So that was something that we had to consider at the start of COVID. But COVID was the worst of times, but it could also provide the best of times. We could not bring in our friends from abroad. Anyway, the focus of Poetry Festival Singapore is more on this island and the region around us. So that was not really a problem. But because of Zoom, we were able to bring in Shinie and Christopher. Over the past 2 years, I can't remember which year. Shinie was with us last year, I think, and Christopher maybe the year before. We could suddenly go global, and we participated in open mics all over. There are people here in this region who would wake up at 1 or 3 a.m. just to participate in open mics in the US or the UK. And that was an opportunity. And this year, we have two of those groups, Poetry Global Network. They're based all over. And Kemlin Tan Bapi has her own outfit Between the Lines open mic, and they're joining the Poetry Festival in a big way. And that's the result of COVID. So we turned digital and global. And then we've also extended our audience. So before, we could probably have 30 people max under very favorable conditions in the National Library or in LaSalle College. But now, actually last year, we had 28,000 people view the different sessions. And they were from many countries as well, not just Singapore anymore. And so in the future, we plan to continue extending the scope of Poetry Festival Singapore, and to tap into these digital platform more. In fact, so we have a couple of workshops and poetry film, which are streaming online, and they're ticketed, so we could actually earn. We could try to see how much we can raise from these sessions online.
Thank you so much, Eric. I think that is also another aspect, right? That you learn to revolutionize, or you learn to play to your strengths and figure out, okay, what do I do given this constraints which are there? And then with the digital technology coming up in a big way, and like we are seeing Zoom, we are sitting across. It's amazing. So I think, yeah, that is there. I say poets will always find a way to say what they have to say, right? Yeah. So coming back to that, poetry has always been so relevant. I mean, across from centuries on, eons ago, we have had poets recording things which were not actually there on pen and paper. It was just passed down orally, right? And so the relevance of poetry has always been there. So during this time, how do you feel that, what were the projects which you all have done recently, or, in the past, which you all felt was very impactful, and you really have that relevance, very happy to bring that cohort together to, bring that big voice out there to say what needs to be said, which only poets can do. Yeah. So we can start. Yeah, Suzanne?
So during 2020, our festival always involves music, always classical music, but any genre of music. But we usually have at least one big classical concert. And in 2020, in this country, there were, in addition to COVID, maybe as distressing for our country, were race riots, and we were sort of revealed to ourselves as having these racist policies and structures in place, and especially in our police forces, that were horribly distressing to many of us. And during this time, a movement started, Black Lives Matter, that maybe many of you have heard of because it has international impact. So we wanted in that festival 2020 that was online to highlight Black speakers, Black voices, Black art, Black accomplishments, without repeating slogans. We didn't want to be saying Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. We wanted to embody that value in the festival itself, if that makes sense. And so we, for our concert, we chose a piece of classical music that was art songs utilizing the poetry of Maya Angelou, who's an African-American poet. And the song cycle is called A Woman's Life. And it begins with a poem from the point of view of a small child. And there are 8 songs altogether. And we had this really fabulous soprano able to perform these songs for us. But we were very surprised that the composer wanted to be part of the Q&A after the concert. I mean, we were so honored that this composer, because he's internationally famous, his name is Richard Danielpour, and he was friends with Maya Angelou, and this was partly why he was inspired to set her poetry to music. He wanted to be there, and during the course of the conversation online via Zoom, he was in Los Angeles, I was here in Ohio, we became friends. And the next day we had a phone call and he said, I really want the Revolution of Tenderness to commission a piece of music specifically to address the problem of the pandemic and to promote healing from the pandemic. And he had an entire vision for having all of the musicians in different squares on a screen, just like you and I are talking right now, for this piece of music. And I was very intrigued. We had never done something like that before. But he kept emphasizing that he wanted this piece of music to be an occasion of healing for people. And so I began to ask myself, how does healing take place? And especially, how could it happen through a piece of classical music? It seems like the performers who have to work very hard, and maybe the audience for the performance would have some sort of experience of healing, but could it last? Could it really address some of the pain that we were experiencing? And this line of questioning made me wonder whether I could involve artists from other fields in this project somehow. And when I first listened to the mock-up of the music, which was a kind of digital rendering of what it would sound like, it wasn't done by real musicians, I thought I heard a voice. It sounded very much like a song, even though there was no voice singing. And I asked Richard, I said, this sounds very much like a song, even though there's no music. And he said, no, that's fair, because the piece of music is a string choir. That's what it's called. And so there is a sort of vocal quality to the strings. And then I got bold and I said, it doesn't just sound like a song, it sounds like a hymn. And he said, well, that's also fair. I would say it's sort of my prayer for all of us. And as a result, I conceived this idea to invite poets from around the world to listen to the mock-up and then either put into words what they heard this voice, if they heard it, singing to us, not as a kind of a setting to music, the words, but more of a poetic interpretation, or perhaps a response in poetry to what they heard. And Shilpa was one of the poets who participated in this project. And we ended up also recording some of the poets reading their poetry and interviews with the poets. And in this way, at least for me, it was an experience of healing, truly, because I saw this international cooperation. And what Shinie so beautifully, I didn't have these words before I heard you say so, Shinie, but provided a kind of oxygen to help us breathe, even in the midst of a respiratory pandemic. I mean, that's a very fitting metaphor that with the death and the dying, there were also these signs of life, and new friendships were born. How am I even here right now, except for this sort of miracle that took place? So we are coming out with an anthology. We've had some delays on the production end of it, but there will be an anthology of this poetry coming out soon. It's right now in design. And yeah, I'm just so very, very full of joy to think about that entire experience from beginning to end, and so grateful to the poets for saying yes to such a crazy sounding project. So especially to you.
Amazing project. I was so fortunate to be invited, Suzanne. I'm so thankful that you invited me. You reached out to me through Messenger. And we worked on it. You sent me the hymn. I mean, and I wrote the hymn of hope, listening to it, and it was just so healing, because when I would go for my walk, I would just put the music on, and I would play it on loop, and I would just allow the words to, kind of like as you said, the words just kind of like existed in the tune, without it actually being there. It was just for us to actually pluck it in and put it into verse. So thank you so much for, that opportunity. It was a lovely piece, and Richard Daniel Poor's music was amazing. I think it was played in
And I was amazed.
Yeah.
Pardon me, I'm so sorry.
It was played in the Philharmonic Symphony in
Pittsburgh. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
At Carnegie Hall in Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
Yes, it was played. What amazed me too was the diversity of the poems. What people heard was really striking to me, and only added to my own experience of the music and of this experience of pandemic. I think the hope that could be found in it. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, Shinie, any of your anthologies which were?
No, I was just listening to you talk, and I was thinking, creativity just got so inventive, because so many avenues were just closed for us. So once I think the Zoom mechanics became less of a gray area, and we saw the potential of reaching out globally, we started to think, I hate to say this, but we started to also look at the semi-silver linings to this, that we could actually get so many international writers together, like for sessions like this, and there is absolutely, there are no carbon footprints, there is no huge, outgo in terms of flights and staying and everything. And this is so convenient. We are sitting in our own homes and we're talking to each other. And then we just kind of go back to whatever we were doing before this, So in Bangalore, BLF, that is the Bangalore Literature Festival, the other festival that I'm involved with, we got into a collaboration with the Bangalore International Center. And we started to do something called World Lit, where we presented international writers to the Bangalore audience. And like I said, at no cost. And we could just reach out to cold call anyone and ask, would you be interested? And for some reason, I feel a lot of these top writers, they're open to these kind of informal invitations. And they just wanted, I think, to reach out to a larger audience. Everyone just became a whole lot sweeter and kinder and more approachable. So we had many writers who were part of that, like Alexander Nicole Smith and Moni Mosin and Anthony Horowitz. We had a whole lot of writers as part of that. And like Eric was saying, he was part of the Bangalore Literature Festival because the 2 years of the of the pandemic, 20 and 21, the last 2 years, we went hybrid with the Bangalore Literature Festival. All our foreign collaborations were on online, and otherwise we had local authors who stayed within Bangalore, got a huge play. So that's how we did the festival for 2 years. But like I said, it was a sad time. It was also a very inventive time for creative attempts. And this was one of the things that I learned very reluctantly, kicking and screaming, but I learned that this could happen, that people sitting in faraway places, but you could do a new kind of curation. You didn't really have to look at, is that person free to travel this side? Is the person sitting here able to go that side? Nothing. You just kind of do an email connect, and then you're able to come up with something different than what you would have thought of earlier. So we've learned a lot. We've learned, I think, mainly the human capability to cope when it comes to somehow being creative.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so right. I think poets, especially during the pandemic time. There was a very close relative of mine, elderly lady, and she said, Shilpa, this is the perfect time. You must be writing like nobody's business, right? And I said, actually, yeah, I mean, with everything going on, like, I think there's so much inside us with what is going on and how the pandemic has created an havoc. And you're trying to, process it. And the way poets process it is through writing, right? So I'm sure that's why so many poets all across the world were very happy that you had this thing and they could pop in and say hi and actually have some conversations. So that's amazing. Yeah. So I think we have lost Dr. Christopher Okemwa. He's dropped out because of electricity. There is a power outage at his end. So unfortunately, he's still not joined us back. So that's a bummer. But yes, so meanwhile, we'll continue. Eric, we can talk about the anthologies which you have done. And so many of them, right? I mean,
Yeah, that's right. It was a very productive time. COVID for me, I was able to finish my doctoral dissertation because we suddenly had some free time. I teach in a school, so we had home-based learning. I saved 2 hours every day from my normal commute. And I was able to write. I was doing research on trauma poetry, which was quite relevant. And I collaborated with another poet here in Singapore, Desmond Kon, and we published a free online anthology on poetry as healing. It's entitled The Atelier of Healing, Atelier of Poetry. And you can check it out online as well. And that was a platform available to people mostly in Singapore, but we also had writers from the US and other places who were looking for a space through which they can vent whatever hang-ups and heartaches they had during the time of COVID and even before. And that was quite successful. And after that, we had 2 more collaborations online featuring international poets. It's A Given Grace, which is a spiritual poetry anthology, and the follow-up, which celebrates the quincentennial of the canonization of Saint Francis Xavier. That's Finding God in All Things. So it was a productive time, all on the digital platform. And Poetry Festival of Singapore ventured into publishing. The anthologies that I talked about were personal projects. And one personal project suddenly became a corporate one for Poetry Festival of Singapore. We had this sequel to Get Lucky, which was an anthology of prose and poetry on the ties that bind Singaporeans and Filipinos. Filipinos are a big migrant group here with maybe 200,000 of us. And what was that? 5 or 6 years ago, we had that anthology. It was quite successful. We sold a lot of copies at the Singapore Writers Festival, which is the big literary festival here. And so we had a call for entries. When was that? 2 years ago. And our application for a grant for a print edition was turned down initially. But then, because of COVID, the National Arts Council was looking for more digital projects, and they approved our second application for an online anthology. And one of the editors, Migs Brabadut, Migs Brabadat, that's how you pronounce it. So she's quite resourceful, and she got a bank and an express courier to sponsor the printing. And we also, like we at the Poetry Festival, got to earn off that project. Yeah, and that's gonna fund maybe an intern's um, um, salary for a month, right, or so. And yeah, so that's so we've had a lot of digital collaborations, and now we're into print publishing. And yeah, so we're also collaborating with more groups and more people. In 2016, I was fortunate to have been shortlisted for the Singapore Literature Prize. And this year, for the first time, the Singapore Literature Prize actually is going to be part of the festival. Their shortlisted poets in all the languages will be performing, at least those who are available on the last day of the festival. So it has come full circle for me personally, and it also affirms just how the festival has grown. So we actually have the gatekeepers joining our festival. Right?
Thank you so much, Eric. That is really amazing. Poetry Festival Singapore has really been doing a lot of good things and widening the scope of poetry in the community. And I think so many people are now joining Poetry Festival Singapore, and so it's really lovely. When we talk of all this, and it's so inspiring to hear from you all as directors how you all have kind of like still held on, to that beacon of hope and the power of poetry and the power of words, and like went on to pursue your projects, convince people to participate in this, widen your scope and get people to come in and join your projects. So I think that's really amazing. So this is how we build the bridges, right, which is what our panel talk was. So coming to the last part of the question, of our panel is, my question is that, like, so we hopefully are now at the end of the pandemic, and when we go back into the normal pre-COVID days, I don't know whether we can call anything normal now, but if we go back to the pre-COVID days, what do you think you would want to change going forward, and what kind of projects you would like to see there, which you had planned and you want to take it forward now? Yeah, we could start with Suzanne.
Okay. Well, I learned a lot from doing the projects that I mentioned to you. Actually, the name of the anthology is Antiphons, because these are all responses to the piece of music that the name of which is Homeward. So I wanted to let you know that, and even later, Shilpa, I can give you a link where people could listen to that piece of music if they wanted to.
Yeah, that would be lovely. If you could share us the link.
I want to do more projects like this.
Okay.
Yes, I would be happy to. But I learned a lot from that experience. And in the past, our festivals were like big parties. And we had, we did a lot of promotional work in order to bring an audience, and of course, a lot of preparation to bring the speakers. The difference about the Antiphons and Homeward Press that we actually had to meet together and have these points of connection together and do a kind of work, a poetic work, as a lead up to then the public celebration of it, the festival. And I just loved this because it had a way of building community. So it wasn't like just putting on a show and then we sent everybody home. It was more like the theme of this talk, building bridges, where we were, because the name of our festival, since we renamed it in 2016, it's Festival of Friendship. And so I've always wanted it to be a true name, and that friendship really would be generated by what we were presenting to people. And I thought we've come closest with this project, the Antiphons project, the Homework project. We came closest. And so this was really a lesson that I'm bringing forward into all of our future events. Will have this this aspect of a kind of seminar or collaborative learning experience leading up to the public celebration. Because for me, this was where the real miracle happened, was in this cross-pollination of ideas among people from widely different backgrounds and perspectives, and even poetic conceptions. This was the most exciting thing for me and that made my heart leap. So even when we're not doing poetry events, we want to have this kind of seminar approach, or I don't know, seminar makes it seem like there's one teacher, but it wasn't like that. We were all, together learning, teaching one another. So I don't know the word for that, but I like the word seminar because it has that meaning of a seed bed where you can plant the seeds and then they grow into something. So if you have a better word, do let me know.
No, thank you so much. I guess, we all learned that we could all be supported across so many communities. We, as people, we were no longer confined to our geographic constraints. And because of that, the support we felt by the outreach we had, and like you all doing all this good work and sending invites and projects and involving all these things, I think people really felt that yes, the pandemic is playing a havoc with everyone, but mentally somewhere there was still that power of connection, that power of feeling supported and being hand in hand, of course, whatever COVID allows you to do that. But yeah, so I wish we had Dr. Christopher Okimba, because he's done a lot of anthologies. I remember when I was reading out his bio, he had mentioned about I Can't Breathe anthology. And I just saw there's an open call for Ukraine, which he is putting together. So if any people are, interested in writing and sending, do reach out to him. And he too does a lot. But it's so sad. I was messaging him on the side, and the power is still not back. So yeah, he's quite disappointed, and so are we. But yeah, so we, Eric, coming back to you. Sorry, I rambled on. Yeah.
As I said, the pandemic was a time for the Poetry Festival to go digital and global. And I wouldn't change a thing if I were to go back to that period. In fact, I would have probably, I'm wondering how come we never thought about going digital and global earlier. We could have gotten more grants that way because we could have reached more people. We wouldn't change a thing really. We would continue with the collaborations, so we've already seen the opportunities of poetry as a platform for self-expression, and as Singapore becomes more affluent, people are more critical, they're also more creative, and poetry is an easy means for them to actually express themselves. And unlike the prose forms, it doesn't take very long to write a poem. If they, if they're writing a haiku or a villanelle, yeah, it doesn't have to take too long. And maybe that's why there are more poetry books that are published here in very busy, pragmatic Singapore. Yeah, because people have no time to write longer works. There's no long poem, really long poem that has been published here. It's a pity, right? That's because of the way this hub of hubs operates. People are under a lot of stress. And so poetry, yeah, provides a vent for that. As I said, it's the cure. You mentioned Plato. It's kind of ironic that he banished all poets from the Republic because he thought that poetry was unethical, unphilosophical, and unpragmatic. But during these crazy times of the pandemic, Suzanne talked about how racism is still very much present more than 60 years after the civil rights movement. And racism is an issue in other societies as well, right? And poetry can help people cope with that situation. We probably can't change it. We are very much aware of what's going on in the news, but we can write about it, and we can write more about it, and grow as societies with a keener sense of respect for each other in Singapore and in other places.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, Eric. Having respect, and I think that comes with a lot of sharing when you're inclusive of diverse voices and diverse communities. And poetry is a very good way of being inviting people to be to participate in these festivals. I think it kind of like the fear of the unknown kind of takes a step back, and people realize that at the end of it we are all human beings and we all have the same sentiment. I mean, COVID was...
Yes, and if I could just add something to that,
sure.
Shilpa. So in previous editions of the Poetry Festival, we actually had like an exclusive session for foreign migrant workers who would perform their own poetry, songs, and dances. But this year, we actually are incorporating our migrant worker poets into the different sessions. So we have them in the women's poetry reading, also with this in the Get Luckier reading. So they don't have to be in their own ghetto. And like the pandemic has been a very hard time for them. We know that very well. And they can actually be part of the community and to read poetry with their peers, right? In other sectors.
Yeah, that's amazing. I remember even last year during our pandemic poetry festival, where only the poets were allowed to come in person, and we still had our 1 meter. We had the tribute to healthcare workers. We had, the migrant workers also a part of that reading. And yes, it's amazing that I think we try not to have ghettos so that, at the end of it, we are all the same, tied by the same thread and having the same sentiments, and understanding that, this is how humanity is, right? Everyone has the same kind of love and the same joy and same happiness and sadness. So I think the beautiful work which all of you all have been doing in building the bridges, within your community and across community, thanks to Zoom and thanks to, the digital revolution which has come due to COVID. So it's amazing. And, It's sad. I wish I could have gone on for a longer time, but
Actually, Shilpa, I think Shinie would like to say some things as
yeah,
well.
yeah. I just wanted to say that we can wrap and just say everyone a thank you. So yeah, Shine.
To what we were previously discussing, I was just thinking that the challenges that we face may seem external. They seem external in the continuum, but actually they are more internal now. And I think the whole process of what we've gone through, the processing, actually, to be more exact, of what we've gone through in artistic, musical, poetic, fictional, in all these realms, it's only getting done right now. We are going to kind of start the process now, the fear and the kind of PTSD that we are going to suffer from. We have to put all of that into perspective. We've lived through something that historically nobody has probably lived through in our living memory. We have no record of something like this passed on to us. So all the fictional and the literary outputs that are going to come, I think they are actually in the process of being written or being created right now. So it will take some time before we are able to put words to the kind of, before we are able to articulate where we were hiding all this time. Shilpa, you were saying, somebody asked you, were you writing? I don't think any writer, any artist was able to just devote time, and just because they had the time. I don't think it was possible to just write or paint up a storm. We usually do that when we feel mortal otherwise. We've just had triplets, we are going to paint up a storm. We don't have the time, we have to meet other deadlines, we'll write a small little poem, to keep us going. But this, what we went through, was so brutal, so savage, that it's going to take some time before we all kind of get our creative act together. Then it would be interesting to see. It would also be very tragic to see where exactly we are all placed.
Yeah. That's rightly said, Shiny. I think something like the pandemic cannot be put together in just a few anthologies. This is going to go through generations, and people, what is going to be recorded now and over the next years is going to be very layered. People will be processing their own thoughts over a period of time, and their own feelings and everything around it's going to be a very continual process. Yeah, you cannot like pin it, and we can't return to normalcy immediately. That's what I said. We can't like go back to pre-COVID at all. Yeah, Suzanne?
I don't really have anything to add except a big thank you. I feel so honored to be included in this company, and I'm very glad to know about all of these festivals, and I feel like my world has been expanded. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. It's amazing, to come on a Saturday morning at 9 o'clock and join us. But we are really very grateful to all of y'all, to our panelists here, Eric, Shinie, Suzanne, and then, Dr. Christopher. I hope you will be able to see this recording. We'll definitely send you the link also. And to our lovely audience who's here, who has been with us. I hope you all have enjoyed this panel. And I would like to thank, this program, which is being brought to us as a part of the Poetry Festival Singapore 2022, and it is supported by the National Arts Council Presentation and Participation Grant. So thank you so much, and keep writing, and wishing you all a very verseful and enjoyable life ahead. Thank you.